Max Gorlin, Melbourne Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club.
Trent Cotchin from the Richmond Footy Club.
Scott Pendlebury from the Collingwood Football Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club.
It's Rory Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows.
This is Tom Mitchell from the Hawthorn Footy Club, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Hey friends, you got MJ from the Coaches Panel. Welcome back to another midweek trade and strategy podcast. And gosh, there is a lot to get through. Joining me on this episode after his debut last week, we are not going to J-Rantol him. We are going to let him play 2 games in a row. I got Jordox back on this episode. Hello, mate. How are you?
Yes, good, mate. Thanks for having me back again. Just like last week, there is a ton to get through. So
it feels like we could say that every week, couldn't we? And then for his first in-season episode, you heard his voice a lot during the preseason, but we've managed to sneak him into this midweek. I've got Benny Gogos. Hello, mate. How are you?
Very well, mate. It was a traumatic week for our fantasy team, so I think we've got a lot to cover tonight.
Oh, there is a lot to get through in this episode. We want to hit our Patreon questions a little bit later on in this episode. Of course, if you're loving the work of the Coaches Panel this preseason and throughout the regular season, you can jump in at a level that is right for you. Exclusive content and a bunch of other different access groups and a heap of other stuff. All your links for that are at coachespanel.tv. I want to talk multi-buy rounds, ruck strategies, some injury impacts of players. And then there's this one North Melbourne Kangaroo that keeps drawing people's attention. We will talk about their skipper, Jack Ziebell, a little bit later on in the episode. Before we do, some news for Ultimate Footy coaches have landed just late this evening on a Wednesday evening, if you're listening to us up late, or Thursday. Just the other day, these ones dropped. And Ben, you're a regular Keeper League coach. I know Jordox has just got involved with these in the past few months, but 12 new players have picked up DPP. There's a couple that are maybe relevant for us in the back line. Dyson Heppel, Miles Bergman, George Hewitt, Sean Burgoyne, and Bailey Dale. Probably of all 5 of those, Dale's more relevant with the forward, but Heppel's probably that big name, isn't he, Benny Gogos, that in that format of the game is now a huge premium option in the back line.
Oh, yeah, mate. And this was exactly why people drafted him in the preseason. So he was someone that was touted as being a full-time general defender come round 1, and he's been a little bit injury prone, and we've seen that sort of manifest during the 2021 season. But when he's out on the park, as we saw on Sunday afternoon, I was about to swear them.
Thank you.
It was very, very exciting. 142 points in Dream Team. So he's the type of guy which he could almost land as your D1, and it's very exciting if you're an owner today.
Yeah, absolutely. Just off the back of that monster score without Ridley, he was massive. In the centre line, Duggan, O'Connor, Zach Williams, and Chad Warner. Look, there's nothing really there. When a player adds centre status, it's rarely of great benefit for coaches, other than a little bit of squad flexibility. So not too much to deep dive there, but Jordox, 3 other players have picked up forward status in the latest DPP editions. Lachie McNeil, pass. He's not even averaging 40. He's in 8% of leagues, and that's 8% too many, if you ask me. But then there are 2 names that do get interesting for coaches. Devon Smith and Mark Murphy are both picked up forward status as centers only, probably unrosterable, almost going around that 70 markers across the format. Now, though, coaches that were struggling for maybe a viable D4, F4 or F5 might have some light at the end of the tunnel with Murphy and Smith jumping in.
Quite interesting, isn't it? I think the smart coaches got a sniff of this, probably before the first round of changes. Particularly the Mark Murphy one is the one that intrigues me the most, just because we've seen Dev Smith as a forward and we know what he can do, but not sure where he's at in his fantasy career or even his Essendon career. And Mark Murphy, as we know, he's right in the tail end of a pretty good career for Blues and for fantasy coaches. Hasn't really got going in that forward line and really scored too well. But something I have noticed the last few weeks, he's started to do what forwards are meant to do and hit the scoreboard. He's had a couple of games where he's kicked a couple of snags and, he's only scoring around the 80s, but, now he's got that forward status. He could be a handy one just to sit there at the F5 or whatever it will be.
Yeah, I think both of them are going to be handy enough for their coaches. All right, lads. There are two really big issues of the week that are stumping a lot of coaches, and then there is a large proportion across the formats that have the dual issue. I'm of course referring to the injury issues to both Lachie Neale and Josh Dunkley. They have both gone in for surgery this week, meaning they are now out for, at least in Neale's case, a minimum of 6 to 8 weeks, while Josh Dunkley, if he gets back before the end of the home and away season, I think the Bulldogs will feel pretty happy about that. So both are trades. Might not have to be this week, though. We'll get to that thought in just a second. But Ben, is there any players like that immediately jump? Josh Dunkley's probably the one that feels like it's causing the most headaches because there's this felt lack of forward premiums. Ben, if you're a Josh Dunkley owner across the formats, who are some guys we should be considering to move him onto? Because unfortunately, we're now losing the number one forward in the game.
Yeah, it was a big injury, MJ. So I come back to planning. Who have you got in the top positions from here to the end of the season? So we're not looking at just averages of, okay, Dunkley's had a great start to the season. He probably will have the greatest average for the home and away season. He also won't play another game for the rest of the season. So we're looking at durability as well as points right now. We've got another 16 games, 17 games of home and away footy, trying to work out who's going to deliver the most points in that time. Where I'm coming at it from is, do you have your ruck set up? So I know a lot of players went in with the R1, R2, R3, all being rookies.
Yeah.
If they've got a rookie ruck right now, I'd be looking to a Gawn or a Grundy. That's the first one because that to me, you can't win fantasy footy in 2021 without both Gawn and Grundy. I would hang my hat on that call.
Yep.
Next up, I'd be looking at the midfield group. Have you got your Clayton Olivers? Have you got your Jack McRae's? Those are probably the guys that I'm seeing as being the big two at the moment.
Yep.
Captaincy options every single week. With this trade, I want to go directly to the top guys. If we do have those guys, and if we can deal with the forward line specifically, Steele side bottom to me is the outstanding option.
I agree.
Dane Zorko not too far away. So Steele side bottom has a history of averaging over 100 in Dream Team for a succession of 4 or 5 years. I had a look at it this morning. It's incredible what he's produced. Dane Zorko is not too far behind, especially when he has the midfield only role, which will be manifesting now with Lachie Neale out for a sustained period of time.
Yeah, good shout.
So I don't like I like either option there. I do prefer still side bottom. We've got a few sort of tag concerns when it comes to Gold Coast in round 9. Tuke Miller coming in to the side, playing some really good attacking footy, but he's had a lot of great performances on Dane Zorko. So in my mind, I'm thinking still side bottom if you've got the rest of your team set up, but have those trigger alerts of, okay, Gawn or Grundy, in my mind, should be the top priorities and work back from there.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. And Jordox, I'm keen on your thoughts. Sometimes we get this forced Dunkley trade or Neale trade, and we'll talk about him more specifically in a second. But the thought is, I could get some value here, or I could get this option here. But it's this interesting point that Benny brings up is you're getting rid of the clear top forward for the year, at least on current trend. Don't replace a top tier level premium in a line for a kind of almost guy. It's an interesting thought that I don't think a lot are picking up on.
No, that's it. And there's so many layers to this. And what I mean by that is, did you have this situation last week with Dangerfield? I think that would be pretty common. So it's almost like a bit of deja vu this week, looking at my team. And it's sort of like a bit of a question of, what did you do last week? Did you go Danger to another forward? Did you go Danger to a mid? Which I think was probably the most popular call because we had Dunkley holding up our forward lines. Or as Betty said, did you just bite the bullet and fix the ruck headaches and get Grundy or Gawn in? So that sort of, for those who have done this already last week with Dangerfield, I'd be saying, what did you do last week? Because you obviously can't do the ruck one again. I wouldn't recommend doing it again, a midfielder again, because what we're doing is we're pushing all these DPP, essentially kids from our midfield to our forward line. And some forward lines now, without Dunkley, without Dangerfield.
Dusty out this week as well.
Oh, yeah, Dusty, yeah. So I think this week now, probably time to start looking at the forwards. And I think Sidebottom's that standout across the three. Ziebell we'll talk about later. And then, those DPPs in fantasy become much more interesting now. The Josh Kellys and the Lachie Hunters who, their roles were sort of stagnant in terms of fantasy, but these injuries could open up. And I think we'll touch on that later as well. So I think Ben makes great points. What's the glaring omission that you saw at the minute? Is it the big midfielder that's clearly going to be, one or two in a McRae or even a Merritt? And then the rucks, we've got an interesting scenario Friday. So my thinking with probably most of my teams is if Flynn plays, I can just play him again. If Flynn's out for Mumford, it's a no-brainer. I get Grundy. Now, the trick to that is, and this is where the planning comes into it, is we will get the Saturday teams on Friday at 6:20, and then a mere 90 minutes later, the Bulldogs game starts. So you will have 90 minutes to decide. So I think you need to head into Friday night, A or B. If Flynn's in, this is what I'm doing. If Flynn's out, I'm hitting the escape button and I'm getting Grundy or Corn.
Yeah, and I think part of me's almost thinking, regardless now, the caveat is always every side is unique in its makeup. There are some sides that they can make that move to take a Dunkley to a mid because they've got two or three other performing. They've got a Ziebell, they've got an Impey in a SuperCoach. They've got two or three others. They might still be going, look, I held on to text last week. I'll hold another week. So there are some forward lines that are uniquely set up to go, no, I can go and load up on another mid. There are some that are going to have to break their structure on the premise of if Flynn misses and move Dunkley, move a Neale, and maybe have to find a way to break that structural format to be able to arrest that issue. That's totally fine. The most important thing for me is have your plan, because if you don't have a plan, that 90 minutes that Jordox has just mentioned, it'll go really, really fast. You'll panic, and the moment you make a panic trade, you'll make a bad trade. So have those plans. If Flynn's plays, I'll do A, B, C. Regardless of if Flynn plays, I won't be seduced. I'll do an A, B, C. If this player gets named, I'll do A, B, D. Whatever it is, because if you don't have a plan, you're going to set yourself up to fail, right, Ben?
Absolutely, Matt. And now I'm going to throw up sort of a different option that we can go about dealing with this. And definitely something we've been discussing a little bit is structural reform. Now, a guy that I think most of us miss, I know a fellow panel member, Fish, managed to pick up very astutely last weekend, is Devin Robertson. So this is a rookie that's jumped up 85,000 in DreamTeam and probably similarly across the formats. Now, as we've just spoken about, Lachie Neale is out. Devin Robertson was a phenomenal ball winner throughout his junior career. Round one debut game, scores a 93 against Collingwood with 7 tackles, has quite a game against the Bulldogs, and then comes out with another 6 tackles against the Blues on Saturday night or Saturday mid-afternoon, gets his another 6 tackles, 75 DreamTeam. So this guy, I think for the next short little period, and when I'm talking short little period, it could only be another 2, 3, 4 weeks.
Sure.
But he has scoring potential, and he has the potential of a rotational or two through the midfield. So I think his dollar earning capacity is still very, very high. I don't hate the idea of potentially moving a Dunkley down to a Dev Robertson if it fixes up another space in your team. So someone like a Lloyd Meek in the ruck, that's something I'd be gravitating towards. I'm not someone who's a big fan right now of the discussion around Matt Flynn. I think if you're looking to trade Flynn, you're cutting yourself off pretty early with the cash gen.
Yeah, there's still a couple more weeks there.
Yeah, absolutely. My ideal would be that you manage to get Flynn onto the R3 and you move in the big 2, and then Flynn becomes a perfect upgrade, downgrade target around the buys, which would be just phenomenally ideal for your cash gen. So Dev Robertson is someone that, I know we're generally opposed to doing this, downgrading to rookies that have already made their first big dollar rise, but he's someone I'd be willing to break that rule on. And quite frankly, I don't think there's any real rules in fantasy other than do what the best you can to try and win, mate. That's what we're all trying to do at the end of the day.
Yeah, especially if you've had weeks like this last week. The other cash cow that
Yeah.
people might have an eye on is a Jai Farrar from Gold Coast. He's playing in the back line, but is forward eligible. He's still on the bubble in Dream Team and SuperCoach. Fantasy, he's already had a couple of price rises. Coaches might, because he and Dev are in comparable levels of price points across the formats due to what Devon is priced at in contrast to that. So who do you think's got the better role security there, Ben? Because Jordox, I've got some questions for you in a sec, but Farrar's he played a nice role on Heaney last week. We know defenders or people that are playing as defenders against Collingwood, it's like fantasy points bonanza. Just asked Dyson Heppel owners last week, Nick Hind owners. Gosh, even Jaden Laverty turned up in Dream Team. That's all you need to know how good it is to be a defender against Collingwood. So we should get a good week for us this week. But some of these injured Suns are starting to trickle back, including Zach Smith as early as this week.
Yeah, even regarding the influx of the Suns that will be occurring over the next 2 to 3 weeks, I think Farrar's done more than enough to hold his spot in the team for the foreseeable future. So he's had 2 really outstanding games. Where I get a little bit more concerned is actually his scoring potential.
Yeah,
so I know that he's had 2 good scores, but I feel like these could almost be the 2 best scores of his fantasy career. So he's not an attacking defender. I've got a few question marks with ball in hand. Now he's done a good job so far, and he certainly demonstrated an intercept ability, which naturally sort of gravitates a little bit higher than the Prestigia Comos, to bring back a name from yesteryear. But I think that Dev's scoring potential is significantly higher, and it all depends at the end of the day what trades you're dealing with. So are you dealing with a Josh Dunkley, or have you got someone in your back line that potentially you're looking to upgrade or downgrade to? But I think Robertson's a very unusual case in that we're dealing with injuries on that line, and I don't tend to like to bring in a premium a premium priced rookie if they're not going to produce me a 70 plus average. So for that reason, I'm not a big fan of Farrar, but I've been wrong before, MJ.
No, we all have, and we don't talk about those. For the credibility of the podcast, we never talk about those. All right, Jordox, what about Lachie Neale? Again, hugely popular pick at the start of the year. Really divided the fantasy footy community. Some were just like, he's a bomb. He's going to be a beast in SuperCoach. He has been before, maybe a little bit overs, but he'll be around the mark. Dream Team and Fantasy, look, maybe it's a little overs, but he's going to be up towards the top of the tree. And now he's done the dirty on every fantasy coach, where he started slow, dropped a lot of cash, tempted those that held him with one banging good score a couple of weeks ago. And now, unfortunately, he's out injured and does require a trade out of our teams. Looking as if you started Neale, I assume it's because you thought he was a top tier mid. Is it just as simple, Jordox, as go a like for like, even with that lost cash?
I think with Neale, and it's frustrating, but I'll say this about Dunkley as well. At least both of them went out swinging. They went down swinging. And what I mean by that is, obviously Dusty, unfortunately, wasn't the case. But he's still worth a lot, Neale, and Dunkley is absolutely top dollar. So what that means is the sky is really the limit with what you do with that trade now. Yeah. So he's around the 750s in Dream Team. And because it's the midfield, the market of the midfield is arguably the most fun to shop in, because there's so much you can do. You could go straight to the top, and I think if you don't have a Jack McRae or a Zach Merritt, they're one of those ones where it's like, all right, I'll just get them in because probably should have started with them. And Jack Steele's right up there as one of those guys over 800. But depending what you can do with your other trade, there's so many names that you could have a look at that would be saving money. Two that sort of stick out for me is Treloar.
Yep. Now
we'll talk about the effect of the Dunkley injury later, but he's one that has just got going. A couple of quiet weeks in the last few weeks. It's just Treloar. He's doing what he did at Collingwood, but he's playing in a real dream team, that midfield. Treloar would be one, but if you're going down a bit further, I did mention this fella last week, and I'll mention him again. But Andy Brayshaw has he had that higher break even, so you could have another look at him. But he had a bit of attention from Kane Turner, and this is what I love about the kid. So he's in, I think, year 4, his 4th year. This is the year where he's starting to get the tag attention, which makes sense because he's a Jet. It really hurt him earlier. He scored a couple of 50s and 60s. And on the weekend, he had a bit of, probably not the hardest of tags from a seasoned tagger in Kane Turner. And he flicked him away like a fly and scored 120. So he's still very cheap if you wanted to save around 100K. And then obviously it depends what you're going to do with the second trade.
Yeah, with both the second trade and that extra cash. That's always the thing that needs to be looked at, is with every trade you make, don't just think and get locked into this one player. And we'll talk about one player that everyone's got on their lips in Jack Ziebell in just a moment. Don't just get locked in on this one guy, this one option. It's always got to be about the combination of what you do. Do the combinations of those moves get you closer to it rather than just this one guy? Because if all you think about is, I need this one person, you limit the narrative and you limit the variable opportunities of how you can
can't have tunnel vision.
Greater increase. No, you can't. And for me, one of the things I'd encourage coaches to at least consider, again, every coach and every side is unique. You don't have to trade Neale and Dunkey this week. You might be in a position where you might go, I'd plan to move on Goulden. I'd plan to move on a Campbell. I'd plan to move on a James Rowe. And I think the cover I might have in those lines, plus this upgrade trade I'm going to do to benefit not losing any cash, might mean for your unique side, you can do that. Because these injured guys, they're not playing, they're not losing cash. Whereas a Goulden's got a really difficult break even based off his past 2 to 3 weeks, not his first 2 to 3 weeks. That might be the right move for you. It might not be, but don't rule that out. Don't just go, I've got Dunkey, I've got Neale, I've got to trade the premiums. No. You might not have to. You might need a plan to make sure you don't get stuck with that injury issue 2, 3, 4 weeks down the road, because that's the issue that can come. But open yourself up to the possibilities that maybe there are some other moves you could do that don't mean you have to trade them straight away.
And the other benefit of that too is sometimes I feel like we do get, we set our sights on someone for a replacement, and it's like, all right, this wasn't the week I wanted to get this guy. His break even's still just unreachable. He doesn't have a great matchup. Maybe he's going to get a tag this week, but I'm trading Neale, so I have to get him now. So you have to pay the extra. In that line of thinking you just said, MJ, maybe there's a perfect say. The guy I want, he's getting a hard tag, has a high break even. I'll get him next week if you've got the cover.
Well, that's it.
I'll just say on that, MJ, and I was sort of fiddling around with a few different things, so might have not been completely dialed in there, but
fiddle away.
I would suggest to not hold any of these injured players.
Talk me out of it.
Yeah, so we're going to be copying rookie scores, mate. At the end of the day, we're copying guys like Anthony Scott, 49 on your bench, James Rowe, 36 on your bench, and Errol Goulden, who I've never seen a rookie this tanked by the stage of round 6. Yeah, probably doesn't even get up this weekend, but if he does, you're looking at a sub 50 there. Jacob Kajisky, who's more likely to kick 0 goals than he is to kick 5. Well, true that. Probably for the rest of the season. I am a Hawks fan, so excited by him. But mate, I don't often say this, but I think that's actually a bit of a stinker call by you. I think you got to be looking at yourself.
It's lobbing you.
No, I would be strongly and firmly in the camp of you've got to be looking to move those guys either to premiums or to be looking to upgrade different parts of your team, as we've sort of discussed. If we're to just simply put them on the bench and give them to next week's problems, then we're realistically looking at a 40-point score, which is going to be a 60 to an 80-point loss on field, and that's just the first week. So, if you're playing for overall, which is like probably a fair chunk of the community that are listening.
Most of our listeners are playing for overall,
yeah. I'd suggest against it. If you're playing for league, it's a different conversation, but I I would suggest maybe that's not the best way to pull your trades.
I think in defence of MJ there, I mean, it's counterintuitive to suggest keeping a gun who has a long-term injury. I think, though, Ben, you're right. You're spot on. In the absolute short term, you will cost yourself points, but don't forget it is a marathon, and the overall structuring of your side. I think, and I'll be honest, I'm not a big overall guy, so I'm more in the head-to-head camp. But I am seeing that you have a path, you have a plan. If you can get away with it, and there would only be a limited number of names that you would try this with, and that would be a James Jordan. Obviously, if you've got Dev Robertson last week, he'd be on your field anyway. The other thing you can do is loophole. So you can have a look at this kid, and if say it's a James Jordan, although I don't know when everyone's playing this week, but just for argument's sake, you have a look at him on a Friday night. Let's go Anthony Scott, just for the sake of it. Friday night, and he pulls out a career score of 85, just hypothetically. Then maybe you can hold the Neale trade and do it next week. If you've got Dunkley as well, you wouldn't keep them both. And I just think explore all options. But
the challenge for coaches is Friday night, you've got Dunkley. So any move you want to do that involves him, any DPP moves, anything, I can't see a lot of coaches that haven't used both their trades by the time Friday night lockout starts. So for me, I think it's whatever moves you're making, you need to know what they are by 6:10 or 6:20 Eastern on a Friday, and just pull the trigger. Don't waste, just do it, because otherwise, and I know Sriram asked, one of our patrons asked a question like, should you wait and should you hold through these rolling lockouts? As someone that has played SuperCoach for a really long time, that has had rolling lockouts for Dream Team, it's not as new for AFL fantasy coaches. They're just getting used to it in the past 12 months. The thing that's going to trip up your season is if you keep waiting, you'll miss a lockout. Life will get busy. Weekends happen. You'll make a mistake. You'll forget something. So if you know the moves you want to make, and with Dunkley, you have to make it by that first Friday night game. Just pull the trigger, pull the trades. They're premiums. Don't fart around with them. Just get it done.
And the last point on that, holding Neale, holding a Dunkley for the sake of your structure is what has pretty much happened every week in 2021. Someone big has gotten injured. So yeah,
you're just kicking the can down the road. That's all you're doing,
guys.
Moving on.
Josh Dunkley. Sorry, I just need to interject quickly.
Yes.
If Josh Dunkley is injured for 12 to 16 weeks, if Lachie Neale is injured for 8 weeks, might as well be 8 months for our fantasy seasons. He's a trade this week and every week, every single time. He is a trade this week. Get him out of your teams.
Move it. The only reason you can't is if you have 3 of these issues.
End of story. If you got 3 of these issues, find a third trade. Go call up Yank, find a third trade.
That's it. Pete Jank, we're calling you.
Realistically, these 2 have got to go. So just keep that front and center.
Yeah, I think it's a fair shout. All right, fair shout. Let's talk about a guy that's causing a lot of people to reconsider their starting squad decisions, and that is, of course, Jack Ziebell, with now Dunkley out and now being a trade this week. Ziebell is really coming into a lot of coaches' considerations. He's had 3 really big weeks and then a couple of reasonably decent scores across the formats, and now is the most in form forward we have that is available to us entering into round 7. So the dilemma for coaches is simply, can you do it? Can you trade in this guy that is arguably still not even quite at peak price just yet, but he's averaging 127 in SuperCoach? I didn't think he'd average that over the first 6 weeks of the year. Like, now I've got him in SuperCoach, so I'm being a bit facetious there. But he's been absolutely considerably way over and above better than what anybody else thought he might have been. In AFL Fantasy and Dream Team, he's averaging 119 in that format, just being an absolute beast for it. In that format, he's gone 95, 82, 139, 89, 140, and the disgusting 170 on the weekend. While if we look at his SuperCoach scoring over the past couple of weeks, it is 113, 72, 155, 107, 148, 169, and probably would have gone to 200 if he didn't get crunched in the last 10 minutes of the game. Ben, we normally say buy low, sell high, but when they're scoring so big, is it still worth spending up this big cash on this guy?
Well, the benefit this year, mate, I'm going to reveal a world first here. So hold your horses. This is a big deal. Jack Ziebell, if you trade him in this week, you actually get his first 6 scores as well.
Oh,
so it's a huge one.
Magic.
It's insane. It's insane. And you get to trade him in for 400,000 as well.
Oh, you get him at the starting price as well.
We're all good. We're all good. No, realistically.
You're using a cheat code there.
Realistically, lads. Okay, let's break it down. And I'm happy to hear the other side of the argument, of course. But I was flicking through some numbers as well. I don't think Jack Ziebell rates in the vicinity of the names I'm about to spit out, but let's do it anyway. So we got Sam Doherty, who was the best fantasy defender we've seen over the last 5 years. From an average perspective, he delivered in DreamTeam, which is the scoring format I play. He delivered 116 back in 2017. Obviously had a couple of injury seasons. Sure. Jake Lloyd, best career season is 107. So we have Jack Ziebell going at 119 right now, playing a ridiculously stupid fantasy relevant role. And by the way, I do own Jack Ziebell, and very happy owner, by the way. But we've got to be tempering expectations. 119 is not going to continue. I will take that bet with anyone who's willing to take it with me. So I'll go as far as to say 110 won't continue, and MJ, I'll go as far as to say 100 won't continue either.
Oh,
so,
I love it.
Yeah, wow. That's a big call.
Very, very confident 100 won't continue.
Why is that? Because people hear that and they look at the scores and they go, but he had 170, he had 140, he had one of this and one of that. How can you say from now he won't get that, given that the ball will likely reside quite a lot in that North back line?
Not averaging 100 from this point on, I think was what he said.
That's correct. 100 from this point on. So talk me through that thought, because people hear that and go, oh, that's bull. And it's like, well, hang on a sec. Let's hear the reasoning behind how and why you don't think he goes 100. Is this just in DreamTeam and AFL Fantasy or across formats, to be clear?
Yeah, So I'm talking about DreamTeam.
DreamTeam and fantasy.
I'm less across exactly what's happening in SuperCoach, although I think that they would transition pretty well. But let's go with DreamTeam anyway. Yeah. So the best fantasy defenders we've had of the past 5 years have basically delivered us 100 seasons. And I'm talking about Doherty here. I'm talking about the Jake Lloyds outside of one obnoxious season for Sam Doherty, which is that 27 season I referred to. And Jake Lloyd's delivered 107, but has typically been more around that 100 type range. Yeah. Now we're putting Jack Ziebell up against the 2 best fantasy defenders of the modern era. Yeah. Now, to me, that means something. Maybe you think that Jack Ziebell is the next heir to the throne. I personally don't. I don't think he. Now we're going to divulge off a little bit. Does he play the role well for the club? There are 2 streams of thought here. One is that he's very communicative, very important for a young defense. Sure. So his leadership is very important. Is he actually good as a halfback? I think. Nope. I think I'll say the right answer there, MJ.
Nope. If you watch people play against North Melbourne, the way sides structure up those inside forward 50s, they are going through Ziebell's men because he's not a defender. He's just not a defender. He's a midfielder. He's a clearance winner and really good at that too, by the way. But he's not a defender. So crafty forwards, good inside forward 50 units. I'll just play through Ziebell's man and expose his defensive liability.
100%. So that's one of the key reasons. Now, the other one that sort of I lead into is, as a development coach, would I be looking at Jack Ziebell getting 35 disposals in my defensive half and thinking this is doing the most for my team in 5 years' time, and especially MJ for the team that's going to win my next premiership at the North Melbourne Footy Club?
Yeah, nah, not even a chance.
That's a big one for me. Now, I know Jordo's going to speak a little bit about the injury history, but the injury history for me, Jack Ziebell does have it. And I've always had concerns over his body. Now, that's another element. I also know that Jack Ziebell is a very, very good footballer as an inside midfielder.
Very good.
Another area that North Melbourne is getting destroyed at. And let's be frank, they're getting destroyed all over the ground. But I don't see a reason why he couldn't be quite a solid inside midfielder.
Yeah.
And then to cap it all off, he's actually shown form and probably some of his best football as a key forward. Now,
true.
That's all well. Now, this is all well and good. I still think he's going to play as a halfback for the next foreseeable future. That doesn't mean the rest of the season.
Sure.
That could mean the next month or so. Now, realistically, do I want a player with these 5 to 6 question marks that I've just outlined, MJ? Do I want to be spending 800, 750, whatever the price is on him? No, sirree. I can't go there. And what actually makes me really excited about going against it is the fact that a lot of people are going for it. Yeah. So it's coming to the point where it's almost a unique move.
To go against him, yeah.
To go against him. And look, the downside is huge. Every time Jack Ziebell goes 140, it's going to hurt you. Totally. But the reality is, if he goes 140 one or two more times and then gets injured or then gets moved out of position because North Melbourne's just had back-to-back 100-point losses, things change very, very rapidly in football. And suddenly Jack Ziebell scores a 60 and then suddenly he gets injured and that sways heavily in your favor. Not to mention that when you're spending 800,000, I know I'm going off on a bit of a rant here, lads, but when you're spending 800,000 on a player, you need them to produce scores around that 120 mark, around the 110 mark. That's their break-even score. Yeah. So you're not like really getting ahead of the pack when you getting those 110s. He needs to be doing that for you. That's the psychology I want everyone to sort of, if they take one thing away from this podcast.
Yeah, it's good.
When you're spending a price on a player, they need to be producing at least that average for you. And if you have intentions of winning the goddamn thing, excuse the French, MJ, sorry, but if you have intentions of winning this thing, you need to actually be producing above and beyond the price that you're paying for. Yeah. So if we're paying 110 for Jack Ziebell, we need him to be doing 120. Yeah. So this is why, from my risk assessment, it's an absolute no-go zone. But I'm really excited to hear Jordan's viewpoint because I think we've had a few different sort of discussions.
Yeah, I love it.
On this panel. It's a great moment for fantasy in general, MJ, because these don't always happen, and it's really exciting.
Yeah, it is. Talk us through Jordox now. I know Ben made this interesting point that he's got some injury concerns. People that follow you on Twitter might have seen a post that you did in the past 12 to 24 hours. Talk us through some of that injury risk that you don't, at least statistically, doesn't seem to be there from your perspective.
Yeah. So I think Ziebell he is just such a fascinating figure of this, just one of the many subplots of our fantasy seasons. And I will just make one quick comment before I get into, I've seen a bit of a pile on Jack Ziebell, and captain of the club, he's been a real stalwart at North. I'm not suggesting, Benny said anything, but just across the social medias and all that, it's not his fault that the club wanted him to play back there. It's not his fault that he's getting the ball. He's leading the club the best he can. So I just wanted to say that.
He's a good dude.
I've been thinking about Ziebell. a lot this week, and one of the not the main things, but one thing I have been hearing is that he's injury prone, and it's just a matter of time before he goes down, which would be such a blow to those who have waited, avoided, and then jumped on now after he's, just about at max price. I had a bit of a look at his career. So since debuting in 2009, he's actually played in 82% of available games. So he's taken to the field in 224 out of 273 games. So missed about 50 games in his career. Yep. Now, since establishing himself in the best 22 in 2011, he's actually played 200 out of 229 games. And of those 29 games missed, 9 of them were last year. In fact, if we remove 2020 from the data, and I know you can't just do that to cherry pick, but I'm going to do it here because 2020 was a real fart of a season, let's be honest, for many players. So if we forget 2020, he actually hasn't missed a game since the last game of 2017. So there are many valid reasons for not jumping on, but I don't think his body is one of them. To some of the other points, the thing I think about Ziebell is sometimes we can go too hard on a name. And I've heard so many people say, I just can't pay that for Ziebell because he's never averaged 100 before. He gets injured, yada, yada, yada. He's never played in this role before, to my knowledge, for North Melbourne. And this isn't 2 games, 3 games. He's had some really friendly scores against sides that concede a lot. This is 6 games in now. And he is number 2 in the comp behind McRae. This isn't just a bit of a fluke that is just going to disappear suddenly. I think sometimes we try and reinvent the wheel. We've got a guy who if you didn't start with him, you've missed the bargain that he was.
Yep.
But the reality is our forward lines are bereft, and they're actually dropping like flies. So I look at Ziebell averaging 119. Do I think he's going to average 119 from here on? I don't. But I can't see his scoring just suddenly stopping. The other thing I wanted to mention as well is, you made that joke earlier, Ben, about you're not going to get those points from the first 6 rounds. You're chasing points. Sometimes those points, we're not banking them, but we're using them as evidence in our decision making. So when I'm looking for a guy, I look at what they've scored. And this guy just so happens to have scored a couple of 140s and a 170. And earlier you mentioned Lloyd and Doherty comparing him. No one's comparing it to them. They've done it for years and years and years. This is a once-off. They've just found a new role for him. What I will say in Dream Team is Doherty and Lloyd have clearly been the kings. Neither of them have ever scored 170 in Dream Team.
All right. I think I'm intrigued by 2 things about Ziebell on both sides of the coin. One side is this. They play Melbourne this week. Based on this year's data, Melbourne are missing a lot of shots at goal. That's because they're getting a lot of shots at goal. So that's good news for Ziebell if he maintains this halfback role. The week following, they play Collingwood. What have we said a couple of times about Collingwood? Defenders against Collingwood, it's money. So his fixture in these next couple of weeks is good. So that's one positive. If you're on the Ziebell train and you're forecasting he's going to score well for the rest of the year for whatever reason, that's good. Here's my rebuttal to that. Those that own Ziebell right now, if they've made this decision, and hopefully a couple of others that have done well for them this year, they're probably higher up in the ranks. So this is purely for those focused on ranks for the moment. If they've already got Ziebell and you're chasing these guys at the top of the tree, in the top couple of hundred, top couple of thousand, because I think depending on the format you play, if you're in the top couple of thousand, gosh, even the top 10,000 in some formats, you're still a legitimate chance to catch the top tier guys, depending how far away you are. You've got to be careful about how many of these types of guys that are the hot starters that might maintain it for the year, and that's okay. But can you pick the next Ziebell-esque type guy that's going to fly from here on in that's unique to these guys? Because if you're bringing in a guy they already have, you're not gaining any points. It's just a negating move. And in a league, if leagues are your focus and Ziebell is your biggest worry in your head-to-head battles, sure, that's a different story. Again, that's it. That's a negating mindset, which is, again, something you should be doing more focus towards cliffhanger wins and leagues rather than this. So for me, I'm more on I'm not trading Ziebell in train. I own him in SuperCoach and very happy with it. But I would rather go and find someone cheaper for mine, someone that I think can match his ceiling in that forward line, which is where we're picking him as a forward. And so for me, I'm going there. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. That's fine. But I'd bank a side bottom or a Zorko from here to the end of the year with clear midfield roles. Neale's out. They're going to have to do that. The Pies are blooding kids but they're not giving them the midfield time. They're putting Sidey in to stem the bleeding. That's why he was in there this week against Essendon. It was, gosh, we've got so many young kids that we're trying to get games into, but we've got to win. Bucks is fighting for a contract. The Pies list still think they're good enough to make finals. They're not going to make finals with Rantle, with McRae, and with Poulter playing heavy midfield minutes and then resting Sidey forward. So that's why for me, I go, yep, the fixture for the next 2 weeks, I reckon is going to hurt coaches that don't own Ziebell. I think that fixture is really good, but I'm banking on a cheaper option every day of the week that's got a greater history because I don't think this is sustainable. There's nothing that shows this is sustainable.
I think, again, it's such a great talking point. Yeah. I think just to be clear, I'm not saying go get him. I'm not.
No, we're not hearing that.
Yeah. What I would say, it comes down to this, right? What do you think? And I'm not asking you guys, but you just ask yourself if you're considering Ziebell, what do you think he's going to score from here on? That's a big question. And if that's the same as or more as the other options, the side bottom or Zorko, that's where it is. What do you think? Because it could go either way. And I think, MJ, on your point of, in overall, you're right, because the sides that started with him, even if he keeps going at this level and you grab him now, you've already paid 200-300K more than those. So, from a financial point, you're behind. Therefore, your team's probably going to be a bit behind. So I get don't chase him, but at what point does he become, say, like no, I'm not going to say a gone, but at what point does it become more damaging not having him, is what I'm saying. But we'll find out.
What do you reckon,
Two things. Okay, so what I would say, number one, history. I want to see a player that's done it for the last 5 years or so. So side bottom to me, and the reason why I bring up the names like the Dohertys and the Lloyds and players of that nature is I want to see who the best halfback has been historically,
sure,
to give me a bit of an identifier as to what Ziebell might be able to do in that current role. So I think it's fair enough to say if Lloyd averaged 107, or if Doherty averaged around that 115, maybe Ziebell can do 110, 115 in his best sort of season ever.
Yep.
But I'm looking, and to that second point around the history. So the first 6 scores to me, they are some indicator. The last 2, 3, 4, 5 years of information, probably the last 2 seasons of information, is a much stronger indicator to me when it comes to trading in players. So that's where I look at it from a long-term perspective.
Even those with a clear role change?
No.
He's never played this role before.
With a role change, it's a little bit different. But again, I come back to my priors being Sam Doherty, my priors being Jake Lloyd, who are traditionally around that 100-point mark.
Yeah.
And then I've also got my really strong priors on steel side bottom being an extensively durable and 100-plus average player.
He's a pretty handy alternative.
It's not bad.
Side bottom.
So
it's not like there's nothing else.
The question becomes, and you guys have both nailed the head on the donkey right now. The question becomes steel side bottom, Dane Zorko, or Jack Ziebell. And for me, I say it with almost, I would say 75, maybe even 80% confidence that Zorko and steel side bottom score more, not necessarily average more, but score more than Jack Ziebell, in my opinion, from here to the end of the season.
And you bank extra cash with that too, which can help you with other trades.
Cash money,
as
MJ.
Well. Cash is money. I can get rid of Goulden that way, Benny. All right. Before we get to some of our Patreon questions, there have been some big injuries that we've spent a bit of time talking about. Need to look at the other side of these injuries as well. Let's dissect this injury for Dunkey. He moves out of that midfield. Someone's got to jump in and take some of these opportunities. Bailey Smith's picked up some CBAs mid-game. Now, Lin Jong was out, of course, if you watch the game. So there was an extra midfield able body that does and can float through there for them. It's going to have a cascading impact down. So rather than a like-for-like replacement, they don't have another Josh Dunkley type sitting in the VFL. It's going to create further opportunities for others. It probably eliminates, I think, some coaches' benefit of doubt of Treloar's midfield minutes Well, that question's now gone. The injury body might still be lingering as further doubt to go to Treloar. Sure, I'll listen to that. But now the midfield role's not. I think Smith has to pick up some of those midfield rotations. I think they're just so deep. It's not going to be one person, is it, Jordox, that covers this one person's role? It's going to be Bont with the extra rotation here or there. It's going to be the McRae not as outsider, Hunter maybe going a little bit more up across the wing. They'll just find ways to move the magnets and make one player come in, whether it be, I don't know, an Ed Richards or a West or any of these type of guys might pop in, and then others will just pivot and move around it, I suppose. That's the Bulldog way, really.
I think it's an interesting one. And I mentioned Treloar before as being a great option for Neale, but having said that, I've been thinking about this a lot this week with the Dunkey out. What does it mean? If we all remember going into round one when Treloar was joining the Bulldogs and Dunkley and McRae had seen weird little, forays forward in previous years, we weren't sure what that makeup was going to look like. We weren't sure who was going to score what. And now I just kind of think we're in the same spot. I mean, Dunkley's out. Who comes in, like you said, maybe Ed Richards. I know Lipinski has been a real fringe player who looks good in the VFL on the weekend, who can play a very similar role to Dunkley. What does it mean? I mean, if you use a bit of logic, it's probably Bailey Smith goes in, and then Hunter might come up the ground and play more wing. So Hunter's the one that stands out, particularly in AF, because you can get him as a forward.
Sure.
But I don't know with the Doggies. I think it's a bit of a reset. I'd like to have a watch first before I made any conclusions on what it means for Treloar, what it means for Bailey Smith. Bailey Smith is the one that I, as a Bulldogs well-wisher, I'm not a fan, but I just wonder if he needs to be in the guts because he looks brilliant when he's in there. And he's had a bit of a drop-off, look, from a fantasy perspective anyway. So I'd personally like to see him go in, Hunter up to a wing, grab Hunter and AF in your forward line, and happy days.
That's the Jordox fingers crossed approach. All right.
Who knows with Bevo at the helm?
Nobody knows. All right, Benny, I want to run another cascading thought by you because you've got your honest pants on today, which I love. Tell me if I'm in the right ballpark or the wrong ballpark for coaches thinking this way. Lachie Whitfield comes in and Jesse Hogan comes in this week. Now, Hogan's been confirmed to play in the AFL. Whitfield's been alluded to, but if it's not this week, he'll play VFL and eventually the following week, you'd guess, should he get through injury-free, he'll play in the AFL. There are, I think, two people that this helps. Well, not helps, two people it impacts. Let's put it this way. Isaac Cumming, does this help or hurt if Whitfield plays more back? And Josh Kelly, who finds himself on the half-forward flank and occasionally on wing. With Hogan and Whitfield back, am I right that these are the two players that might get the most impacted, or are there others that also we need to factor in? Because Cumming's been a popular stepping stone in the back line. Kelly's been a pain in my butt, and I think I'm the only person on team Josh Kelly for the rest of the year. Maybe I'm clutching at straws here. Help a brother out, Betty. What are these two players coming back in for the Giants, man?
Yeah, well, Kelly's the one that it's bewildering how he hasn't played in the midfield as a full-time midfielder up until now. We've got quantifiable evidence. He's just not getting the centre bounce attendances at the moment. MJ, I can't put your mind at ease because I can't work it out for the life of me anyway.
Come on, Ben.
The reality is the Giants have had midfield injuries. They've already got a depleted midfield lineup, and Lachie Whitfield isn't necessarily one that attends, 75% of centre bounce attendances. So I tend to think it doesn't negatively affect doesn't negatively affect Josh Kelly. Reason for that is because you just bring a great player into the lineup, so the ball retention becomes better, and that does have a cascading effect that I think sometimes we don't think about too much. But Lachie Whitfield, I think, is going to go more so to a halfback flank to begin the season.
Okay.
And I think that affects Cumming to some degree. But Cummings also played such an outstanding, he's had such an outstanding start to the season.
Yeah.
He hasn't quite looked like he's going to deliver enough to be a premium scorer. So potentially you can hold him through to the bye now, get a really good idea around what Whitfield's going to do for everyone's scores around you, knowing that, when we're talking about someone affecting someone, we're only talking about 10 to 15% traditionally.
Yeah.
So I would be fairly comfortable in holding Cumming, seeing what happens up until the bye. Unfortunately, the Giants do have the early bye.
Yeah.
Whitfield is another guy that we'd be thinking about as potentially bringing in as our defender down the line. Now, that's right. And me saying he's a defender this year. Yeah. That's how much I know about him, because he's been completely outside of my thoughts. But we'd be thinking about bringing him in post-bye as well. So that's just another one to keep an eye out for the future. We are going to sort of be talking about the buys and the narrative around the buys in the coming weeks.
Yeah.
Someone to be thinking about post-bye, because they have that round 12 bye. So we're going to have a good look at him, but I would suggest to not trade him in until we've led up to that round 12 start. So yeah, those would be my thoughts on him, but it's going to be a really interesting one. And there's going to be someone that I haven't worked out that is going to affect. I can guarantee you that right now, MJ.
No, I appreciate that, Ben. You've put my heart at ease, and at the same time, you've left me with more questions. So that's exactly what I wanted from you there, mate, which is fantastic. Don't forget, there's plenty more stuff to keep checking out every single day of the week at coachespanel.tv. There's always articles there, whether it be the weekly Ultimate Footy League draft pickups that you can get from the player pool that Jordox gives you, whether it's the weekend wrap up from Johnny Coombs, the break evens that have just landed at coachespanel.tv, and of course the big issues of the week that we've already spent a lot of time talking about in Neale and Dunkey. I've given you my thoughts on who I'd be trading them to and how I'd be trading them at coachespanel.tv. All right, let's get into some of our Patreon questions and wanting to throw them out there. A lot of them along the way, Patreons. The good news is we've answered them for you as we go. So we don't have to spend a whole heap of time on some of these. But we'll throw them out nonetheless as some big stuff. This is an AFL fantasy question for you. We'll throw it over to you, Jordox, for this one. Jake wants to know, is Sean Darcy, stick with him, he says. I know that's not a good start to a question, but he wants you to hold the firm with him right now. He says this: is he a decent left field option as a stepping stone ruck in AFL fantasy? He's got Nick Nat this week, but has a pretty good run up to his bye round. He's got that break even of 40, and he's averaging 98.6 in his last three, and he's gone against McAvoy, O'Brien, and Goldstein. So he's not exactly rucking against nobodies. Goldie and also McAvoy are not the pinnacle that they were a handful of years ago. But is this a stepping stone ruck, or should he just be like cascading to the moon for the big boys, or looking for a cheap cow in between?
Look, he is a stepping stone. Absolutely. And he's looked good since he's come in. The question is, do you really want to be looking at a stepping stone at this point? I mean, it's hard to know without, knowing what the current ruck setup this person has. But if you're at a point now where you're pulling hair out because you're stuck in a bit of a pickle, if this is your only way out to just getting by, then yeah, but I would just do everything I can to find another way to get up to one of the top two. I'm not even recommending O'Brien anymore. I think, I think Darcy will score. I don't think it's time for the stepping stones. I think you've already got a stepping stone. You started with someone who was a stepping stone. All this stepping. If you can, shoot for the moon and get Grundy or Gorn.
Yep, nice work. It's a question from Paul to you, Ben. Paul currently finds him inside the top 10 of AFL fantasy. Ooh. So go, Paul, representing the brand with a couple of other coaches, paddlists, not far behind him between Fish and Rids in the top 15 as well, just quietly. He wants to know this, though. How much should we consider buy round planning at this stage? It's in the context of his trading out of Dunkley. But how much weight, with 6 weeks to go till the buys, do they start to factor in for you, or is it still a couple more weeks to go?
Yeah, well, firstly, huge ups to Paul. That's just incredible, mate. And you got to enjoy it. Like we have such a grind as like fantasy, especially hardcore fantasy players. And it's so rare that you get into that top 10. Just absolutely live it up, mate. Even if, so many players are going to play for 10 years and they're never going to achieve that. So it's a massive ups. Now, as to the question, I think, you've got to be planning as soon as possible for the buys. They're going to sneak up on us really quickly. In fact, I reckon these last 6 weeks, I've gone to sleep once or twice. I've woken up and 6 weeks have passed, and I feel that's going to be the exact same way going into these bye rounds. It's going to sneak up on us really, really quickly. Now, I wouldn't be absolutely freaking out if one of the buys was sort of a little bit overbalanced, especially those later buys. Ideally, if you can sort of get a few more players into the round 14, even the round 13, that's pretty good. But yeah, just start planning for them from now. Definitely, 100%.
Yeah, good thoughts. An AFL fantasy question for you, Jordox, from Ben. He wants to know, Dunkley to Grundy in AFL fantasy. He wants to end the weekly Flynn in or out saga he's already got going. Is it going to get the Jordox tick of approval, that trade?
Dunkley to Grundy.
Dunkley to Grundy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, that was
Dunkley to Grundy.
All right.
Yeah, sorry.
No.
Dunkley to Grundy.
Yes. You've said yes. I'll take that as a yes.
Yeah, sorry. I lost that audio for a sec there. Dunkley
all I
to
heard
Grundy,
was a yes.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, go with yes.
That's all you needed to give me was a yes. I don't mind that, man. I don't mind that. And last question from Craig. Oh, we've already answered that in the episode. Craig wanted to know, I think Benny answered this nicely for us. Is it more important to trade the cows? We're starting to bleed cash, even if it means benching Dunkley for a week. You know Benny's answer. Go back and listen to the first 15 minutes. Don't kick the can down the road. Get rid of these premiums. Bring in other premiums. Your side will thank you for that problem later. Anything you'd like to add to that for Craig's benefit?
No, absolutely not. Just absolutely get the points in. Points over dollars every day of the week, twice on Sundays. And guess what? We don't have that many good rookies to be bringing in right now anyway. So, go for it, mate.
Yeah, it's very, very true. There are every other question we've got, and there's been a bunch of them, have these names attached to them, Dunkley or Neale. And we've answered them for you right throughout this podcast episode. Benny Gogos, a pleasure to have you back on this episode, and nice to see you doing nicely in the rankings too, my friend.
Thanks, mate. It was a great time to be here. Awesome to hang out with Jordan as well. So Jordox, the man, and it's a really exciting time. Let's keep going and keep hustling, keep loving fantasy footy, mate. It's great to have footy back in 2021.
Certainly is. Jordox, you've now 2 weeks down for Dream Team and SuperCoaches. You're officially on the bubble now after completing 2. So let's see if we can get a price rise out of you next week. So nice work from you, man.
Thanks. Yes, I got the negative break even. And just on what Benny was saying about love and fantasy, I reckon we're being challenged harder than we've ever been as fantasy coaches. The rolling lockouts, the teams not being announced. And I know there are people out there who are really struggling with it.
Yep.
Just hang in there. We're all in this together. It's been bloody tough to start. But yeah, just find the fun in it because that's what we're here for.
Life, if this is all about enjoyment, it's really what it is. And we're on the hardcore side of people. If you're listening to the coaches panel, you're certainly on the hardcore than the casual side of it. But at the end of the day, life is to be lived. Life is to be enjoyed. And if this thing is causing you so much stress, just pull the trigger on the trades on Friday night. Just get it done. Don't worry about it. That way, it's not in your hands. Just relax. Life is to be lived. Trades are to be made. And Dream Team is to be won by Rids again. That's all you need to know about how it's all going to go down. Enjoy your week this week, friends. I hope Rookie Roulette is kind to you. You nail the captaincy calls. But from all of us here at the Coaches Panel, we'll chat to you soon.